I think Montgomery's production has been about as good as it can get for David Montgomery. Jahmyr Gibbs, on the other hand, has 31 touchdowns in his first 2 seasons in the league. You're talking about legendary numbers. He has more touchdowns than Barry Sanders did at this point in his career. More touchdowns than LaDainian Tomlinson had at this point in his career. Like, I think it's time that we take a step back and just say, Jahmyr Gibbs is one of the most talented offensive players in football. He has the ability to average 25 points per game.
What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
Yo, what is up? If you are tuning in second week of January to a fantasy pod, that means you are an absolute degenerate. That means you're just like me. You're a sicko, and I love you. So thank you for being here. If you tuned in to School of Scott in the off season, you were accustomed to me interviewing a really smart, brilliant, wonderful guest. If you tuned in during the season, you had the privilege of listening to Theo interview myself every single week. And so it's back to the off season. I'm going to be hosting today's show, and I have a wonderful guest, no better possible guest than the man himself, who you've been listening to for 17 straight weeks. Theo Gremminger, back in the School of Scott, but in opposite chairs. He just dropped an absolute banger of an article way too early, 2025 fantasy football rankings. He is giving you the top 25. I was supposed to make my own list. And we were going to battle it out with our competing top 25s. I didn't do that. I'm pretty sidetracked with CEO stuff right as the season ended. I don't want to give away too much. I just want to say it was an incredible year. I really appreciate everyone, who listened to us every week, everyone who's a subscriber. We're so happy to have you as part of the team. We're doing big things, really big things. I don't know how much I can give away, but Fantasy Points data, the best color commenter you can think of. He uses Fantasy Points data to prep for his broadcast every single week. The biggest NFL agent you can think of, him and his team use Fantasy Points data every single week. NFL teams are using at least one really high ranking director of analytics at an NFL company is using Fantasy Points data every week to try and find the next edge in their upcoming matchup. And so big things are happening behind the scenes. So I've been sidetracked with CEO stuff. So we're going to go through Theo's article here, top 25, and he's on the hot seat. I might be vicious here. He doesn't know what to expect. Theo, thank you for joining us. What's going on?
This is the first time I record all the time, and this is the first recording I'm doing actually in 2025. Just got back from a little vacay with the family. I'm rejuvenated. I'm ready for any haymaker you might throw at me. My top 25, it's absolute fire. It's very forward thinking, and I think that this is going to be. Some people might be disagreeing with a few of these ranks, but I think that this is the way the market's going to be looking over the next few months. So we'll see how it goes. The early best balls, we'll see where the market is there. I know I'm planning on being one in a couple weeks at Big FFPC one. So I'm ready, Scott. What do you got?
All right, let's start off with 101. You decided to go with Ja'Marr Chase, even though the Bengals might lose T. Higgins, and Chase was considerably less productive without T. Higgins. Mike Gesicki was out producing him, out targeting him in some of these. No, I love this pick. I'm right on board. Ja'Marr Chase, triple crown. Come on, 101. You feel good about it?
I feel very good about it. And I think that the statistical edge he gave you, you don't usually see this big of a gap between the wide receiver 1 overall and everyone else. You also have, when you start, we'll get a little bit deeper into the wide receiver ranks, but we can start poking a little bit of holes into some of the other players. Like Justin Jefferson now has target competition from Jordan Addison, target competition from TJ Hawkinson. When it comes to Chase, he's the unquestioned leader of this room. T. Higgins had this phenomenal season. I don't think he's going to be back. I don't think that I don't think it's like a 100% he's gone, like some people are saying. I'm projecting him to leave, but let's say he does
I think
leave.
he sticks
I
around,
think,
honestly.
I mean, it would be the best thing for him in terms of his production, not necessarily his wallet. I think some of these teams like Carolina, New England, Washington could completely, treat him with the same regard as like Chase might get salary wise. Like I think T. Higgins open market is going to get more than Nico Collins and Jalen Waddle got last year. So we'll see.
Mhm.
But I think that this is a franchise and an offense that if they lose T. Higgins, you'll see them draft a wide receiver or they'll sign someone. There's plenty of wide receivers they could get on a lesser deal that they could plug in and maybe not get the same role, but I think there'll be a strong wide receiver 2 role, like Chris Godwin in the wide receiver 2 role, a very different one, sort of like a supercharged Tyler Boyd type role. Like we'll see them figure it out. I don't think it's going to be like Andre Yoshivas and Jermaine Burton on day one opposite Ja'Marr Chase, and we're like, oh no, he's going to get doubled every game. I think they'll figure it out. So yeah, I think Chase is the chalk. He's also in that perfect age range where there's still some upside there. Like, why can't he be a 200 target guy next year?
Yeah, what was weird was, targets came down, or like the first half of the season. We talked about this on the Everything Report, where he was seeing less volume in the games where he saw less volume. Higgins kind of becoming more of the PPR cheat code until very late in the season. And he was more productive for that and for it. And that was also true of his rookie season. I think he's just like kind of a can't miss, where it's just like, elite alpha wide receiver 1. I think he could be a hyper efficient lower target guy. I think he could be a target hog if he wants. So I take no issue with Ja'Marr Chase as the 101. I think that's a good call. 102, you have Saquon Barkley, and I can't really nitpick this too much in a year where like every analyst was proven wrong on Saquon Barkley. Who was the most valuable player in fantasy in 2024? It was Saquon Barkley. In 2 wide receiver leagues, in 3 wide receiver leagues, it was Ja'Marr Chase, but it was so close between those 2 guys. But yeah, I think I have no problem with this, but I think you're going to see people nitpick this and drive him down because you're going to look back at the injury history with the Giants, the efficiency issues with the Giants. I know this is a much better team. And then you're going to get the regression to the mean nerds, of which I am one, that say this isn't sustainable. Like, look at all these long runs he had. This has never been done before, or every season in which this was done, you see a heavy regression to the mean in the following season. Look at Jalen Hurts, touchdown vultures, the tush push. It's just not sustainable. Do you have a counter to this? Do you feel really good about 102, or is that a concern?
No, I think for me, 102 to 105 is sort of flat with all exciting backs. But I'll say this. One thing that you do very well, Scott, every offseason is dive into the offensive coordinators. And I think that another thing that Sigmund Bloom has often discussed is we get super excited about talking about the brand new signal callers, what these guys are going to bring to the table, but we don't pay enough attention to year 2 offensive coordinators. And I think that Kellen Moore, maybe he found his footing. He sort of was able to roll with the punches. Things went wrong with this Philadelphia offense. They missed Dallas Goedert for part of the year, missed Devonta Smith for parts of the year, missed AJ Brown for parts of the year. Like the one constant was Saquon Barkley. This is one where I don't know. I mean, even if he regresses 20%, he's still not going to hurt you. If we get this sort of production last year, like minus like 20%, if he goes down 10%, there's a couple variables too, like maybe the receiving numbers go up. He just looks so comfortable in this offense that I don't know. I think there's still some meat left on the bone before we start talking about fading him simply because he had such a fantastic season.
All right, Theo, 103, Jahmyr Gibbs. And on one hand, I get it. There's no David Montgomery, far and away the most valuable running back in fantasy, easily one of the best running backs in all of football. The dude is awesome. I just worry we didn't learn anything new about him. It's, David Montgomery got hurt and he balled the F out. It was the same thing as last year, but what happens if there's a healthy David Montgomery? Are you drafting this guy as the RB2 who's just going to be the RB8 because it's a 50-50 committee alongside this other guy who is much less talented than he is, but it's this stubborn commitment to that running back by committee situation. So Montgomery stays healthy, that's not great for you. And like, let's not forget, Montgomery, before he got hurt, just signed an extension with the Lions. So I don't see them moving away from him. Maybe how good he looks now. Maybe we see something different in the playoffs and it's like, oh, no. He's the bell cow now, but it feels like that's fully baked in. What do you think?
When I look at Jahmyr Gibbs, it's like when we start searching for league winners, it's this sort of talent profile where the guy averaged 21 points per game this year. And I know some of that scoring numbers were backloaded into week 18 where nobody was getting any of those points except for DFS players. But at the end of the day, it's like we had this discussion a few weeks back where I made this prediction to you that I said I thought Jahmyr Gibbs would end up being like the 103 and the dark horse 101. David Montgomery has sort of been, let's say, exceeding expectations for him in back-to-back seasons. Like, I think Montgomery's production has been about as good as it can get for David Montgomery. Jahmyr Gibbs, on the other hand, has 31 touchdowns in his first 2 seasons in the league. You're talking about legendary numbers. He has more touchdowns than Barry Sanders did at this point in his career. More touchdowns than LaDainian Tomlinson had at this point in his career. Like, I think it's time that we take a step back and just say, Jahmyr Gibbs is one of the most talented offensive players in football. He has the ability to average 25 points per game. We also have the factor that Ben Johnson might not be there. And most people will say this is a negative for the offense as a whole. And I would tend to agree with that. But I do think that the next man in might be less inclined to use 2 backs at the same level that Johnson did. That was sort of the MO Johnson had, the year with DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams, where they both finished inside RB2. He had the last year with Gibbs and Montgomery, and then this year where it looked like both were going to be RB1s. And then, of course, Montgomery goes down and Gibbs makes this run up to like RB2 overall. So for me, I just think it's more of a bet on the talent. The offense is still going to be very good. It's still one of the best offensive lines in football. And I'm not going to let the presence of David Montgomery prevent me from drafting a guy. I mean, Scott, we're talking about 7 touchdowns in like a 6-day period down the year. The guy looks incredible. And the home run hitting ability. And I'll say this, when he came into the league, I'm sure you and Brett Whitefield at the time discussed this guy's pass catching ability is legendary. This is going to be Christian McCaffrey. This is going to be Reggie Bush. He hasn't hit that ceiling at all. He hasn't had the usage as a receiver. If the next offensive coordinator says, you know what, I'm going to get this guy all the targets as well, then we're talking about a new ceiling opened up. So I think for me, it's really like with, and I talked to Ryan as well about this, because when I first gave these rankings to Ryan, he wanted me to put Achane ahead of Gibbs. I'm like, yeah, I just can't do it. I have Achane high, but Gibbs is very special talent, and he'll only be 23 years old next year. This is a guy where I don't think we've seen what a ceiling season looks like from Gibbs. I'm extremely bullish. I hope to have a lot of exposure to Gibbs. It was a very, very profitable dynasty season for me with a ton of exposure to Gibbs. Next year, I want to have a lot of exposure to him in redraft because I think this guy could really, really break fantasy next year if it all kind of swings his way.
Yeah, you had me on your show actually to talk about him before the draft that year, and I said he was Alvin Kamara reincarnated, knowing full well like how blasphemous that sounds, and to me, that's exactly what he looks like. And if that's the case, you can hand wave the committee concerns. Yeah. Like maybe he's just that good, and he looks it for sure. Still, I think it's a mistake to have him above your 104. Bijan Robinson hit 17.5 DraftKings fantasy points in 11 of his last 12 games, was the overall RB1 from week 6 on. Usage kept improving, volume kept climbing. I think the offense runs through him. I think he's, another sick talent. We've been kind of starved for elite running back talents ever since that I don't know, legendary Kamara year that also had Kareem Hunt and Christian McCaffrey and Aaron Jones and whatever. And this year's class is stacked. Last year's class is good. Year before that. So Bijan Robinson, 104. I would probably have him above Gibbs personally.
Yeah, I mean, there's really no wrong answer here. I think that Robinson's the safer pick, but I think like the for me, I think Gibbs might have the highest ceiling, and I'll agree with you. I do think that the Falcons. I even wrote it in the article. I think that the Falcons could enter the season even more running back centric in their touches. You had going from Cousins to Penix. We have such a small sample size. It's only a 3-game sample size with Penix. But I was pretty impressed with what I saw. And I do think that Bijan is about as safe as it gets. He's a stud. He's a two-way player. The touchdown ceiling was extremely high this year. The total yardage was there. I mean, Bijan's an absolute stud. Those guys are, I mean, they're very much in the top 4. You could have put Bijan ahead of Saquon. I wouldn't want to argue with you about that one either.
Okay. Next one is Devon Achane. I'm sure if this were Ryan, he would have him as the 101. One thing I think is funny is like, I don't know why regression works this way, but it just seems to constantly work this way, where everyone like heading into the season is like Achane as a top regression candidate. It's like, yeah, no shit. He just had the best yards per carry season in NFL history. Of course but then up until like 3 weeks ago, he was like dead last in rushing yards over expectation per carry after, leading the league. Same thing happened with Tony Pollard. Same thing happened with Leonard Fournette one year, Joe Mixon 1 year. So I don't know why it went from like best to worst. It just tends to work like that. But you did see the explosive plays come back these last 3 weeks. Usage volume out of this world. We're talking about Jahmyr Gibbs as Alvin Kamara. He's had 52 catches in back-to-back years. Achane had nearly 80 and 600 yards. And we know he has that upside as a runner to potentially break records in yards per carry. I do worry about things looking more like a running back by committee situation. It wouldn't surprise me if they draft someone, but Achane top 5, I think that's right. I feel good about that.
Yeah, and I'll add that I think that this is a guy that you could see him with 100 targets next year. There's also the rumblings that Tyreek Hill might want out. I think this could end up being kind of an offseason of change in Miami. If Tyreek Hill does move on, it already went from a Tyreek Hill offense to a Devon Achane offense like rapidly. And if Tyreek Hill's gone next year and they enter the season with like Jalen Waddle, Malik Washington, and whoever at the wide receiver spot, then I think you could see them fully commit to using Achane as a receiver even more than they did this year. So I think that's an exciting one. Agreed. Not too much to talk about. He's an absolute stud. And I'd like to say anybody who listened in to you, Ryan, myself last offseason, I hope you enjoyed your Achane season because the guy was awesome this year.
All right. Next up, we have 6 wide receivers in a row. We have Justin Jefferson 6, Puka Nacua 7, CeeDee Lamb 8, Amon-Ra St. Brown 9, Nico Collins 10, rookie Brian Thomas Jr. 11, rookie Malik Nabers 112. We're gonna debate this in a little bit, but first I want to say, how are you feeling about this round 1? Does this not look like one of the best, deepest round 1s? Where like 112 is a great place to be.
Yeah, and it's funny because we talked about this earlier today that the last 2 years, if you're drafting at the 112, it wasn't looked at as like, hey, this is the nut spot. But it has turned out to be
it's like the worst spot, easily.
Yeah, the last 2 years, it's turned out that way. CeeDee Lamb 2 years ago, you were getting him.
CeeDee Lamb, St. Brown, round 1 turn, which was 2 nuts guys to have. This year it was Gibbs, Barkley.
Barkley was there, and then I was drafting with Nelson Sousa in the New York Super in the NFFC, and Jamar Chase was falling into like the 110. So like the 110, 111, 112. This past offseason, it was, you have to have that 101. This is the Christian McCaffrey. You got to get that Christian McCaffrey. And then Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb were looked at as these like elite assets to get at the number 2 and number 3 spots, however you ranked them. And it turned out to be another year where the back end was just awesome. So it could end up being that way again. And yeah, I mean, I ranked all these wide receivers. I tend to gravitate towards wide receivers as much as possible. And I think this is going to be a really special year for the position. we had this year, the running back scoring was way up. These things have a way of sort of correcting themselves, and next year could be the revenge of the wide receiver. And I think a number of these guys are in that age range where they're in their primes. They have very, very strong roles. These guys are all capable of absorbing a high level of targets. And then when you look at certain guys, the touchdown scoring numbers could be absolutely wild. And the talent, just pure talent of this range of wide receivers is awesome. So I think you could change this order up. The one guy that I think people are sort of soured on is Nico Collins in this range, where I've had some pushback on this one. I think Nico's a little.
They were saying you were too low or too high.
Yeah, they were saying I was a little bit high on this one. I shared it with a couple of.
Wow, no, I think maybe too low.
Well, so this is you've made a very strong argument for Nico for this entire season, and this was one where it looked like he was going to be the league winner. Then obviously he deals with some injuries, and the Houston offense has sort of gone south. But I think that right now people are extremely low on C.J. Stroud, extremely low on Bobby Slowick. They have an opportunity to sort of regain the faith in the NFL playoffs. Maybe that Nico goes off and people sort of are like totally agreeing with this one. For me, I just think Nico Collins, he's averaged like 17 and a half points per game for 2 straight seasons. He's right there if he can stay healthy, that if everything goes well for him with his role, you could be talking about a guy who puts up 21, 22 points per game, challenges for the wide receiver 1 overall, and has a like peak Julio Jones type outcome. I think you've made that comparison. And I think the more you think about it, he's sort of in that quality of player where he makes the grown-ass man touchdowns. He's able to get behind a defense. He's able to absorb a higher number of targets than maybe we would have thought 2 years ago. So I'm cool with where I have Nico. I still think that I don't want to put him up as high maybe as you would. I just have less question marks when it comes to a guy like Puka, a guy like a CeeDee Lamb. Those guys are just so locked in right now.
Yeah, I love the player. Like I said, he's Julio 2.0, or like he's kind of like a AJ Brown clone too to me. It's just he has CJ Stroud as his quarterback. Stroud had one of the best rookie seasons ever. This year, he's analytically one of the worst quarterbacks in football. So if you get a middle of the road outcome, I could see him as a league record. But honestly, I thought this ranking at 110 is fine. This isn't the one I would fight you with the most, but we'll get to that. All right, 2 things I want to fight you on. Jefferson versus Puka. To me, it's easily Puka. Like the best wide receiver in football the last 2 years by all of my favorite stats: yards per route run, first downs per route run, fantasy points per route run, XFP per route run. I just think he's that dude. I think he's, like he could have that Cooper Kupp season, the record-breaking season easily this year. I think Stafford's coming back. I'm not too worried about that. I am a little worried about Cooper Kupp, who ghosted these last few weeks. I have to think Puka steps up in a big way. What do you think about that?
I think both of those guys are excellent. With Justin Jefferson, I've seen a wide receiver 1 overall season out of him already. With Puka, it's something where it's really splitting hairs on this one, to be honest with you. Puka, I made a prediction the other day. I dropped these predictions, 20 predictions for the 2025 season, and I said that I think Puka Nacua is going to break the NFL record for receptions in a season. I think he's going to get 150 receptions this year, and I think he can be the next 200 target player in the league. I think that's in the range of outcomes. So there's been 3 players who have hit 200 targets. Puka looks like the kind who can do it. He's average enough targets per game that if he can just stay healthy and take that next step where Kupp's a year older and Nacua just kind of takes on an even larger role, I think the sort of like peak Michael Thomas type season or better, somewhere in between Michael Thomas, wide receiver 1 overall season, and Cooper Kupp's wide receiver 1 overall season, somewhere in between those 2 guys could be in the wheelhouse. He's fantastic. But when it comes to Jefferson, I mean, gosh, it seems like it's really hard for me to rank Justin Jefferson low. This was a transition season. Next year could potentially be year 2 for Sam Darnold, where maybe a little bit more familiarity. this was the transition season. This was supposed to.
I think it's JJ McCarthy and they go more run heavy.
Well, that's that could happen as well. So if that's the case, and I think that Darnold does move on, then I think you probably flip these two guys and you just take Nacua. And it's sort of the unknown upside drafter is going to gravitate towards Nacua as well. He'll be in year 3. The one thing with Chase that we didn't bring up was it's exceedingly difficult to repeat as wide receiver 1 overall. Cooper Kupp was going to do it if he didn't get injured. At least we think he would have. It's hard to imagine him regressing that much if he didn't get injured the year Jefferson finished as the wide receiver 1 overall. You have to go back to like Antonio Brown to find a wide receiver 1 overall that repeated. It's just so many things can go wrong. A guy can catch fewer touchdowns. A guy can miss a couple games with injury. An offense can regress. With Nacua, we love the offensive situation for him. Sean McVay has been one where if you follow Scott's work on offensive coordinators, that's one of the coordinators that you really, really want to bet on. So we have a lot of boxes sort of checking off with Nacua, and the fact that he's entering year 3, everything's sort of slowed down to a point where you could see Nacua have like a break fantasy type season. So if you're an unknown upside guy and you want to take the guy with maybe the highest possible ceiling, go with him. If you want to go with a little bit more of a player you've sort of seen reach that outcome, he'll be bracketed by the 2 former wide receiver 1 overalls in Jefferson and Lamb. So I'm okay with all those guys. It's a really exciting group of wide receivers, though. If I could walk out of my draft with 2 of these guys because someone wants to push Josh Jacobs up, push Derrick Henry up, I'm happy going wide receiver. I love it. And Scott, you're not even talking about the 2 guys that I'm most excited to talk about is Malik Nabers and Brian Thomas Jr. Where that's my start.
All right, Theo. So I did want to say one last thing on Puka Nacua. I would be happy to take him 101. I don't know that he's my 101, but I would be fine with Puka 101. Like that's how good or deep this 2025 feels in comparison to other years where it's like there's a clear delineation between 106 and 101 or whatever. I would be fine with Puka 101. Is that crazy?
No, I don't think it's.
Is that a hot take?
It's a little hot take. Going anybody over Ja'Marr Chase at the 101 for me is a hot take right now. Chase is just unbelievable.
In a PPR league? I don't know. Maybe I'm just love drunk on Puka. But yeah, let's talk about these rookies. I don't want to right now I'm just beating you up on guys who are like one pick next to each other. So like that doesn't seem fair, but I would definitely go Nabers over BTJ. I mean, the bottom line is like these guys look elite. They're insanely talented. I gravitate more towards Nabers with Dayball still with the Giants. I think that's a big point. The dude just had the best target share and first read target share of any wide receiver in fantasy points data history. That is the most important stat to me, more predictive than anything else. Although they were all close and all the other stats I care about. BTJ also went off with Evan Ingram out and Christian Kirk out and Gabe Davis out, but like that doesn't really, the dude's just freaking awesome. It's also, by the way, that Nabers outproduced him when they were on the same team together in college. I think you get the Giants a shitty bridge quarterback, just like a Kirk Cousin or Sam Darnold, whatever. Like I think we could be taking him 101 in 2026 so easy. And I don't know that I feel as strongly about BTJ, but I do know from a dynasty perspective, like give me all the BTJ. And you and I were all over that in the everything report.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of okay. So we have another trend, and the trends are always like our friends when we're trying to chase this sort of thing. The last 4 seasons, the wide receiver 1 overall has led the NFL in targets and in catches. So if we're going to project which guy is going to have that sort of outcome where he could lead the league in catches, lead the league in targets, it's absolutely Malik Nabers. This is a guy where he's an absolute target magnet. Everyone talks about Brock Bowers, how he broke the Puka Nacua record, but Malik Nabers also broke it. He set the record for the most receptions by a rookie wide receiver ever. And he also a record for the New York Giants in his first season. So he's the target magnet. He's the one. But when you start talking about Brian Thomas Jr., to me, it's a little bit of a squint and you see peak Josh Gordon. And anybody who was around during that time frame, it's like, hey, man, you want some of that Josh Gordon, who's not necessarily going to get you a 20-target game like Malik Nabers will, but a guy who just might impose his will and have this insane Julio Jones-like outcome. So for me, I think both of them are appropriate picks. Nabers definitely is the safer one. The guy is just so good at absorbing targets. You bring up the first read rate. It's incredible what Nabers has done. And yeah, when you compare the two at LSU, it's not even close. It was Nabers as well. So yeah, maybe it should be Nabers and Brian Thomas Jr. flip-flopping, but I'm happy to have exposure to both this year. I think they're both awesome. And yeah, we've been all over both those guys.
So I mentioned this on I think your show. I got inside sources on Malik Nabers versus BTJ and LSU, and it was my source was telling me is like, don't read too much into the target discrepancy. Nabers was a bit of an asshole, like in a good way, where he like demanded the ball, whereas like BTJ was more laid back. So the target discrepancy was more of a factor of like keeping this guy happy. But like, that's what I want in a PPR league is like, give me the assholes. Like if I don't get 10 targets every game, I'm going to cause a problem. And here's a good stat for you. Most fantasy points per game from a rookie wide receiver since 1990, the year I was born: 1 OBJ, 2 Randy Moss, 3 Malik Nabers, 4 Jamar Chase. Insane year from Nabers on a shitty team. Don't underrate just how shitty that, like, Jaguars were bottom 7, sure, but like Giants were bottom 1 with a big gap between them and like the next least competent offense in football. Also, we're not talking about Ladd McConkey. These wide receivers are great. You know who led in ass? Ladd McConkey. Who led in yards per route run, first downs per route run, yards per target over expectation, missed tackles forced per catch? Ladd McConkey. Issues with target volume, but we'll get to him. Is he in the top 25?
No, he didn't make it. That's one where it's sort of like I had, like, when we get down to it, there's a number of running backs who get crammed in the bottom of the 25. If push came to shove and I'm drafting, I'd go Ladd over those two guys. So I'm with you. Ladd McConkey's awesome. I think that this is one where, especially you're in a dynasty league right now, you might be able to get some Ladd McConkey. I don't think that the market has sort of moved with the other two guys ahead of him, despite his incredible season. I think people are still sort of waiting for something bad to happen where Chargers add another wide receiver, something like that. But I think at the end of the day, Ladd is really, really special. Just a great class of wide receivers towards the top. But Ladd, he could have easily been in there.
Yep. Next up is another rookie. Any guesses, folks at home, and who it is? I think there's an argument to be made. You could take them above the 2 wide receivers we just mentioned, like, which is just a testament to how freakish this dude is. Brock Bowers, tight end. We all know rookie tight ends typically struggle, and then they have that breakout sophomore season. Not the case for Brock Bowers, who, if he were led all tight ends in fantasy points, if he were a wide receiver, he would have been the wide receiver 9, just behind CeeDee Lamb on the year. And this is something we talked about during our prospect research, is like, okay, he's the greatest tight end prospect ever, but just how freakish is he? Because this is a stacked wide receiver class. And if he were in my model as a wide receiver, he'd be a generational wide receiver. And then you have to factor in that tight end points go such a farther long way to helping your team than wide receiver points, because, you know, the talent gap there is so massive. It's an absolute cheat code. Most receptions by any rookie in NFL history. Malik Nabers is 2, Puka Nacua 3. Massive upside. This dude is just a freak of nature. I love him. I want him on all my teams. 201, Brock Bowers. What's his upside? Does he have eventual like top 3 overall pickups?
Yeah, and I think that it'll be interesting to see where he ends up in the FFPC and tight end premium ADP, because I think that he's going to be up there with the top 3, top 4. And there'll be some leagues where people just take him 1. I get the 101. I don't know how many times I'm going to get the 101. I'm going to make sure I get Brock Bowers. And when we talk about him on a historical note, he had the 3rd most receptions all time in a single season at the tight end position. So I think next year the natural progression is for him to pass Zach Ertz by and set the record in year 2. I think that he also, in the other record to keep an eye on that Puka Nacua probably would have gotten this year had he not gotten injured, is the 2-year record, which is shared by Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Michael Thomas for the most receptions in a 2-year period in NFL history. So for a tight end to give you that sort of an edge is absolutely scary. A few factors could fall into place. We don't know what the quarterback situation is in Las Vegas heading into next year. I think there's
It can't be much worse. Theo.
It can't be, but there's maybe a small chance it might be AOC to start the year, depending on how this draft class, not to get too draft class focused, but it's not the deepest class for quarterbacks. And you bring up Sam Darnold. After Sam Darnold, it's not too deep of a class for free agent quarterbacks either. So there's not exactly a number of players that are sort of elevate Brock Bowers in terms of quarterback landing spots. Maybe they get a second chance quarterback. Maybe some guy like Kirk Cousins is like a bridge quarterback there. So agreed, it can get better, but it's the chances that you're going to just get a Shedeur Sanders, a Cam Ward, or a Sam Darnold, that might not happen. So it might still be another year of really, really poor quarterback play. It sort of caps the touchdown ceiling a little bit for Bowers. But I do think that when you have an entire offseason to prepare for how are we going to maximize his usage, last year we didn't have that. We had him sort of being able to coexist with Devontae Adams, and then the role sort of became elevated throughout the year, obviously with Adams gone. So he'll start the year with this absurd target ceiling. I mean, when you talk about a positional edge, Bowers gives you all of it, anything you'd ever want. Last year, I compared him to a bigger Jordy Nelson playing tight end, and the haters came at me on that one. Where are you guys now? So
that is a sexy comp.
And I said with a little Shannon Sharp mixed in.
That's got me hot and bothered.
That's a good one. So Brock Bowers is the truth. But I will say that here's the one argument is I have Trey McBride at 23, not to believe 23. Okay. To me, he's also gives you this incredible edge at the tight end spot where his target share actually was higher than Bowers. And Trey McBride, this is a guy where I hate to say positive touchdown regression, but no matter what, we can criticize Kyler all we want. And certainly there's going to be people who are very effusive in their criticism of Kyler. But Kyler's still going to be better than anything that Vegas puts behind center next year, barring some big move. So for me, McBride is closer to Bowers than maybe the market wants to realize. I think that sometimes we get, and we should get head over heels with what Bowers was able to do, but I think we should be even more excited about Trey McBride. We should be more excited about Trey McBride than we are. I really do think it's a big two at the tight end spot. There's your guy, George Kittle. There's going to be a couple other people we want to draft next year. But at the end of the day, if we simply just took away the tight end distinction, both of these guys are just incredible target magnets. And there's no reason to think that they can't exceed what they did this year. Trey McBride, also 25 years old, perfectly in that wheelhouse to take another step forward. Bowers, of course, rookie. So it's really the change in the guard is complete. We went from like the Travis Kelce years. Now it's the Bowers and McBride years.
Yeah. I mean, I think Bowers is kind of due for touchdown regression too. He only had 5. Yeah. McBride only had 1 receiving touchdown, but he had
two rushing,
one rushing. And then, so anyway, dude, I love Bowers. We just talked about 3 really exciting rookie wide receivers, or receivers. You know who we didn't talk about? Marvin Harrison Jr. I got a question for you, Theo. Dynasty League, wide receiver designation for both. Are you taking Bowers or are you taking Marvin Harrison Jr.?
Bowers, no question. And I'm not on the I'm not on the like I actually think there's going to be a window this offseason if you're playing Dynasty to trade for Marvin Harrison Jr., who's getting extremely beat up by everyone right now. And again, it's Marvin Harrison Jr. is really getting punished for us inflating him in ADP in redraft. I don't think that he's bad. I think they used him poorly. But at the end of the day, how can you not go Bowers over Marvin Harrison Jr. right now? Like Brock Bowers is just incredible. For him to get this sort of outcome as a rookie, like we can't downplay it. It's historically so
the prince who was promised.
Yeah, I mean,
and the one who is not. Theo, it's official. I am taking the V away from Marvin Harrison. He's now either Should I give him the L? Is he Marlon Harrison?
Don't do it. Don't
Are
do
we
it.
gonna-
Too harsh.
He needs two consecutive 100-yard games to earn the V back. Right now, he's Marlon Harrison to me.
Well, I mean, we'll see what happens next year. I think sometimes we have this thing with these wide receivers where the guy didn't completely fall flat on his face historically, though. Like the final numbers are okay
Yeah.
enough where people are still going to be so punitive with the other guys in his class outscoring him, sort of like what we saw with Jackson Smith and Jigba, where JSN got pushed down last year. JSN got pushed down below a lot of these rookie wide receivers, and JSN ended up producing at ADP. So I think we could get to that point with Marvin Harrison Jr. I think that the market is going to be a little bit higher on him ADP wise, where there's going to be a little bit of resistance point with just how far Marvin Harrison Jr. can fall, because I think people will still say, "Hey, I'm not gonna let these guys get Marvin Harrison Jr. that late." But yeah, it's certainly if we were redrafting the class, he'd be going behind McConkey as well.
All right. I won't give him the L. I'll give him the T. He's now Martin Harrison.
There you go. That's better.
And I won't call him by any other name on School of Scott until he gets back-to-back 100-yard games. Next one on your list, AJ Brown. I know people said, oh, he feels like he could be 5 spots higher, and I think that's fine. I think it's just a testament to how deep this tier is. I'm totally comfortable with where you have him, just because the Eagles just finished dead last in pass attempts per game and how high you have Saquon Barkley. This is fine. And then I think there's a big tier. I personally think, or maybe it's just I don't feel great about your what is it, 203, number 15, Josh Jacobs. And then you have a 2025 rookie right behind him who I'd rather take. And so next up you have number 15, Josh Jacobs, 16, Ashton Jeanty, 17, Chase Brown. I don't love the Josh Jacobs call. I get it. He's super productive down the stretch, but the team really liked Marshawn Lloyd. They kept talking about him having a clear role, the Aaron Jones role. And you did see Jacobs in that committee role. And it seemed like they were kind of saving, all right, let's keep him here. And then Marshawn Lloyd steps in and he just had like horrific injury luck as a rookie, never got to play. So that's my bias there. I'll let you defend it in a second if you want to. Ashton Jeanty, though, I think I'd put him in that top tier. I don't see too many concerns. I think whatever team drafts him as an uber bell cow. Brett Whitefield's going to disagree based on film study, but to me, this is the best prospect to come out since at least Saquon Barkley, maybe the best since Christian McCaffrey in my model. Freak talent, former wide receiver in high school, caught a ton of passes 2 years ago, didn't catch a ton of passes last year. What he did was break a ton of rushing records. So I think whatever team takes him is going to deploy him with an insane amount of volume, ideal usage, uber bell cow. He gets me excited. I think that's a player where if you're drafting best ball teams today, you draft him wherever he is and know that he's going to jump around immediately after the draft. Chase Brown, I think he was awesome. I mean, clearly the usage volume is awesome, but I do worry if they really trust him. I think the Bengals have too many issues on defense to really address it. So that's probably a good pick and probably a good value there, honestly. I would take over Josh Jacobs. Any quick counters to anything I just said?
No, it was more of the ranking for Jacobs is about as high as it could have been, where the other two guys, I think there's a little more room for growth. I'm glad you brought up Jeanty as a receiver. I'm writing another article about dream landing spots. You'll be able to read that at FantasyPoints soon. But one thing that I discussed was the 39 catch season that he had in 2023. And it wasn't like that was like one big spike week where they happened to use him as a receiver. He had 7 games with at least 4 catches in that span. So this is a guy where they really leaned on him as a receiver, and it was recent enough. He's exceptional. We used your term, the Scott Barrett Uber bell cow. This is your Uber bell cow. Like at the end of the day, if you asked me to bet on who has the most running back touches next year, and I had to rank guys, I will bet that Jeanty is a top 5 in running back touches next season without even knowing the landing spot, because he's just going to command them. He's awesome. The best story about him, and I'll give Bruce Feldman the shout on this one. 605-pound squat at Boise State, And the only
Oh,
reason
baby.
it wasn't higher is because the strength and conditioning coaches would not let him go past 605. They would not allow him to put more weight on the bar. So you're talking about a guy, we don't even know the strength level. Everything about him, it just screams incredible usage. And there's been a very strong track record for these guys that get drafted in his range, returning value in year one. You talk about the seasons by guys like Saquon Barkley, guys like Zeke Elliott. You can go down the list. There's been plenty of them. So I think that like push comes to shove, it's Jeanty. But at the end of the day, like Josh Jacobs, this is the offensive focal point in Green Bay. I know that historically Matt LaFleur likes using two backs. I was big on Marshawn Lloyd as well, but I do think that there's something to be said that it's been the Josh Jacobs show. A lot of it's occurred over the second half of the season. I do think when you draft him, you're going to get off to a very fast start in terms of running back volume, but it does feel really weird for me to push a guy who was getting drafted at like 36 overall up to 15 overall. So this is probably one, when I do an update to this article, he's probably going to be a little bit lower. He probably should be lower than that guy who's going to be like 31 next year as well. If we want to go with like an older running back who gets a ton of carries and a ton of touchdowns. But yeah, Jeanty's definitely like, at the end of the day, he's probably going to be with those wide receivers in the end of round one.
Okay. All right. Jeanty 6, Chase Brown 17, 18 Drake London, 19 Derrick Henry, 20 Brees Hall. Brees was so frustrating. He just like seemed to lose his top end speed this year, and it really sucked all the upside out of him. I don't have a great read on him. 21 Bucky Irving. That is spicy. That is sexy. And then we get to 2020. Then we get to 22, which is we might come to blows on. I don't know what you squat, Theo. I just know it's a lot more than me. But we'll save that. Quick hit on Drake London, Derrick Henry, Brees Hall, Bucky Irving. Who do you want to cape up for? Who's most exciting?
Well, I think at the end of the day, if 3-game sample size gets you excited, then Drake London, when we start talking about a guy who could lead the NFL in catches, lead the NFL in targets, being the wide receiver 1 overall for 4 straight seasons now, Drake London has a 39% target share in the 3 games that Michael Penix has started. This is a guy who had 100 catches this year. This is still a very young player. This is still a player that is ascending and very comfortable with the quarterback there. So Drake London's one where if you're in the middle of the second round and you don't know who to pick, just take Drake London. And I don't think this pick would hurt you at all. And at the end of the day, I think he's probably a quote unquote safer pick than the running backs around him, where Scott has question marks on several of these guys. Henry, I mean,
No. You had to pick one, and you picked
London.
the one I happen to disagree with the
well,
most.
then go for it.
So you're citing a 3-game sample for Drake London. The first game, Darnell Mooney outproduced him, more receiving yards. The next game, Mooney got hurt. The next game, Mooney sat out. And what you're left with, this happened accidentally because I had to cape up for my guy, Christian Watson. His career might be over after this ACL. Poor one out, heartbreaking. But the 2022 wide receiver class, in games with a route share 60% or better, Christian Watson 1, 13.9 fantasy points per game. Garrett Wilson 2, Chris Olave 3, Jameson Williams 4, then Drake London 5, George Pickens 6. I don't know. It seems like every year he goes higher than I would like, or I think he deserves. So I never end up with him. I don't want to turn this into a battle before we get into 22, which is definitely a battle.
45.1 first read rate on Fantasy Points data.
I know.
Also with Michael Penix. And at the end of the day, like, I mean, I get it. Darnell Mooney was really, really good this year. But at the end of the day, he's still Darnell Mooney. London's the alpha. We're not going into a season thinking this is going to be a Kyle Pitts season ever again. It's very clearly Drake London. I think next year could be very consolidated with a lot of Bijan touches, a lot of Drake London, and then the other guys sort of are the role players. Mooney had like his best season ever as a pro in a number of metrics. So there's a chance that he regresses. And also when we get to younger quarterbacks like Penix, there's potential that he could be a little bit more hyper-focused on a single target than maybe Cousins, who is been in the league a long time and would spread the ball around for better or for worse. So I'll be a little bit more bullish than you are on London. And I think this is one we could kind of talk about all offseason on School of Scott.
Theo, this could be a 5-hour long
It's
show.
awesome.
Honestly, one thing I'll say one more thing. I promised myself I wouldn't do it. The narrative on Penix coming out was like, he's a bit raw here, but he has the best deep ball. One NFL scout said he's seen in 30 years. Another one said best deep ball since Russell Wilson. That's more Darnell Mooney's game than Drake London, although London can do that well. He's a little bit of the George Pickens to him. To me, it's a little much. Irving, I thought, was really interesting just because, like, I told you this over the summer, if he was 10 pounds heavier, he'd be my favorite running back in the class. But the size concerns, but you saw him as a bell cow and you saw him smash as a bell cow. But here's where we get spicy. And I don't have a great argument here, Theo. I just know where my heart lies. And you have Christian McCaffrey, 22. I don't know where he would be in my rankings. No idea. I just know I want him on all of my teams. And I have a much greater risk. Apologies in advance, folks. I have a much greater risk tolerance, I think, than anyone else. What is my magnum opus called? It is, or self-proclaimed magnum. It's called Upside Wins Championship. So I always gravitate more towards upside. But we had a tweet today from Nick Wagoner, 49ers beat writer, said McCaffrey is 100%. The Achilles issue has 100%, quote unquote, calmed down. It's not going to be an issue at all heading into next season. He could play right now if the 49ers were in the playoffs. Stephania Bell said, I expect CMC back with a vengeance next season. And so I think where you had him is fine. I just know wherever he winds up, because he burned so many people, he is going to be lower than he should relative to league wrecking upside. And so there's a chance he's, stuck in a committee, but I don't know. I think like the whole value CMC provides to a 49ers is that he's on the field every snap. He's not tipping play calls. Better yet, he's dictating coverage, which you can exploit. So 28 years old. What is he? 29 next year. We just saw Derrick Henry destroy age curve. So I'm going to be into that. I don't know. I don't know about you. I get it.
No, I think that this is one of those things where you have to have a little bit of risk tolerance here. Once you start seeing the sort of these injuries with older backs, a lot of times it doesn't ever get better. Christian McCaffrey took a trip to Germany this year, Scott, and the guy's fully healthy. But I do think that I think he'll end up somewhere in this range. I think that people are going to be a little bit apprehensive leaning into him. Maybe in the early underdog tournaments, he'll be like, once we start getting the volume players in post Super Bowl, maybe he'll be a little higher in the first round. But I do think this is sort of it's very weird for me to put Bucky Irving ahead of Christian McCaffrey. I just worry that you're going to get into a situation where it might be a little bit more of a committee than we're used to. Now, will that matter at all if Christian McCaffrey's getting the goal line touches and all the targets out of the backfield? No. He'll be the high value touch killer. But at the end of the day, I think that they have to utilize a second back. They have to keep him fresh. There was another cool thing where there's been some early strength of schedule metrics coming out, and it looks like the 49ers are going to get this incredibly soft one this year. So you'll have that too. This could be a big bounce back season for the 49ers. And if it happens, they could drag McCaffrey with them on that. So maybe I'm too low on him. But yeah, 28 years old, missed a lot of games. That worries me a little bit.
Yeah. Looking at the rest of your list here, you got 23 Trey McBride. And like, certainly when you frame it that way, it's like, would you rather have Bowers at cost or McBride at cost? I get it. I might make me lean more towards McBride, just relative to the players going around him. Jonathan Taylor, 24. I think that's good. Kyron Williams, 25. I can't take any issue with. So you definitely left some names off. Who were the names that you left off that you felt most uneasy about?
Well, I think that usually we don't see, I think we're going to see a correction with the elite quarterbacks this year, where I think that the big two of Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen are going to get pushed up, where I think they'll be in consideration with some people, where I can get a Jamar Chase at the 101, the best running back or wide receiver or McBride at the 212, and then I can just take Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson and have this elite quarterback. I think that those guys are going to get pushed up. Who is quarterback 3, 4, 5? Probably going to be Jalen Hurts. That's an interesting one. Joe Burrow's going to be up there, and certainly Jaden Daniels are probably the 3, 4, 5, but Allen and Lamar in their own tier. If T. Higgins lands on a team where we start getting extremely excited about his target ceiling, and he's the clear-cut wide receiver 1 in that particular offense, I think T. Higgins could get pushed in there. And then you have your assortment of other running backs like Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon, Chuba Hubbard, James Cook, and then Rashee Rice. That's the one where if he would have stayed healthy, we would have talked about him a little bit earlier. His role in Kansas City was elite. So that's all those guys sort of jump out at me. I think at the end of the day, people are probably going to be the angriest that I didn't put Kamara in there and James Cook because both those guys had big points per game. So I know that there's a lot. The guy had 16 touchdowns, Scott. So at the end of the day,
he committee back who ran hot.
OJ Simpson numbers over in Buffalo.
I don't want any part.
No, I'm not.
James
I agree
Cook.
with you. I'm off of him too in this range.
All right, 3-way committee backfield with a quarterback who vultures touchdowns. I don't think he cleared a 45% snap share in any of his last 5 games. So what I think is most interesting is the quarterbacks you mentioned. In a vacuum, I have no problem with him top 25, and in fact, I'll argue for it in a second. But to argue against it is like, what was my recommendation this past summer? Is just draft Jaden Daniels on every single one of your teams. And so if there's a Jaden Daniels of 2025, that will be my recommendation. But in a vacuum, like, I think the highest end quarterbacks are going too low. So we have a stat at Fantasy Points called wins above replacement WAR. You can find this for free. You can, even if you're not a sub, you can access it. And so if you look at PPR 2 wide receiver leagues, 10 team ESPN, which is, what the vast majority of people play, most valuable player, Saquon Barkley, 2, Jahmyr Gibbs, 3, Bijan Robinson, 4, Lamar Jackson. And then you have Josh Allen at 12. You have Joe Burrow at 13. You have Jaden Daniels at 17. They're not in your top 25. Even if you go to like 3 wide receiver leagues, which is kind of more what I play, you have Lamar Jackson, the 6th most valuable player in fantasy this past year. So you can get really good value on that. Like we always said in the past, it's not a predictable position. It's scoring is really flat. That's not the case anymore. You have these high end alphas who are outproducing everyone else to such a degree that it's providing like really great returns to your team. So I just think that's like an interesting sort of philosophical thing to discuss and how that's been the case the past 2 years now.
Yeah. I mean, it comes down to it where the market drove these quarterbacks up 2 seasons ago in ADP, where you had the Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts tier that was going in this 2nd, 3rd round. Lamar Jackson was close to those guys. It turned out to be a big 4. Then in 2023, we had all of these quarterbacks, the Jordan Loves, the CJ Strouds. They all sort of hit where the waiver, and Dak Prescott had that massive season where you had a bunch of value from guys who were QB2s and waiver wire quarterbacks. And the market's like, you know what? We're going to push these guys down. We're not going to drive these guys up. There wasn't that big of an edge, but this year there was. And at the end of the day, it's like the value of having a Lamar Jackson and a Josh Allen as the 3rd draft pick you make, it's helping you avoid landmines, and it's giving you a high ceiling outcome player. I think that people need to get over the fact that I'm not supposed to draft a quarterback early here and just say I can find my values at the other positions in a round or 2. But at the end of the day, when I'm drafting that next tier of quarterback, I don't have a ceiling outcome that I do with a Lamar Jackson. Maybe Jaden Daniels takes that next step next year and joins this duo. But these 2 guys are just so elite, and everything's looking good for next year as well.
All right. Great show, Theo. I feel like this, honestly, we could have went for 6 hours. We could do this all day, every day. And in fact, that's probably what we're going to do for much of the off season is, debate players, talk about drafts. And so check out Theo's article, absolute banger, way too early 2025 fantasy football rankings, top 25 over on fantasypoints.com. And tune into School of Scott. We're going to keep doing this. I think next week we'll do what I refer to as a self-flagellation session. So I put out my draft guide in early August. I give you my rankings. And so we want to look back at that piece, see what I got right, see what I got wrong, see what was good process, bad results, bad process, bad results, see what we can learn from that. And Theo, when you're doing the show sheet, I want you to be vicious, man. I want you to be hard on me. So I think we're going to do that. I think, it's therapeutic. You got to let it all out and then, self-flagellate a little bit and then come back stronger, better than ever for 2025.
That's right. All off season, we're going to bring you those great episodes. And this article is not paywalled over at Fantasy Points. You can read it right away. We'll put it in the description on YouTube. And yeah, go and check it out. We're going to crush it all off season long. Happy New Year to everyone.
Yeah. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Thanks for listening. Please leave a 5-star review, all that good stuff. Check out fantasypoints.com. And thanks for listening.